We're going to talk about emotional development, all the attributes that are involved within emotional development in different stages of children in their learning levels within school. I'm going to break this up into two parts just to be able to fully divulge into each portion of this chapter. We're going to talk about the importance of emotions and the emotional regulation in learners for how to help them succeed in school. Um, we will talk about age appropriate emotional regulation and the importance of being able to understand each other's emotions. We'll start with what are emotions? Emotions are subjective reactions to important events. Um, there are four different components to this definition. The importance of the event is at the top of the list simply because how you perceive a situation will be different than someone next to you. You may not have the same level of importance in a situation as someone else. You may see it as a mild scenario where someone else thinks that it's a life altering scenario. So, therefore, your emotional change in that situation will alter based on how you perceive the event. There will be a change in your psychological, attribute. This could be your heart rate, your temperature, even. Um, any of these psychological attributes can change because of your emotion. You know, something makes you scared, your heart's going to beat, that sort of thing. Um, Readiness for action, um, just you're ready for the next phase of the scenario, and then how you interpret the event. That is going to go into the appraisal, which is the meaning given to an event, and that is different for every person. How you perceive the event and how important you feel it is to yourself, your family, your friends, that's all going to change your emotion in that scenario. Charles Darwin had a lot to do with how we categorize our emotions. He lived from 1809 to 1882, and in 1872 he wrote the book concerning emotional expression. We learned previously about ethology, and um, it's a science concerned with explaining animals' behavior. And in his book, he asks several thought-provoking questions, such as, do we learn that to which we express? Basically, do we know what makes us feel sad? Do we know what makes us feel frightened or happy? Do all people, regardless of their culture, express emotions in the same way? And after his documentation of animals and humans in widely different cultures, he concluded that emotional expression is not learned, but is innate and universal. He found that our communication is through emotional expression. Um, Between species, he believed that our communication was even through emotional expression because throughout cultural diversity, there were still similar and equal emotional expressions. This being furrowed brows, frowns, smiles, how we see with our eyes. And he determined that there was no cultural diversity in facial expressions. He came up with the thought that all our emotions and our emotional facial expressions were natural and equal across the cultural diversity board. And then Carol Izard broadened his search and thought that there were six basic emotions. Yes, he agreed with Darwin that there were emotional facial expressions that were all equal, but he categorized them with six: interest, joy and happiness, sadness, anger, disgust, and fear. He believed this would be to promote the survival of infants, for example. If an infant isn't going to crawl down a flight of stairs per se, because of their fear of the downward incline. Or the same for infants stay near their parents because that makes them feel safe. This is just how he thought to categorize. He thought that the facial expressions and the emotional expressions, were rapid and automatic, that you don't have to think about how you're going to express on your face. But there has been constant controversy among scientists since Charles Darwin's research was published in the 1800s that, yes, they all agree we have basic unlearned emotional expression, but several scientists wanted to even further add to the list and add love, pride, hope, gratitude, and compassion because those things aren't learned. But they all do agree that there are universal basic emotions, just like Darwin had originally said. And there are obviously positive and negative emotional expression. Emotions influence learning and thought. Now, this one is kind of going back to your emotion definition. Emotional significance had a lot to do with how you influence your learning and thought. How do you perceive an event that's going on? Your emotions then organize your memories as well. Say you're in a science class and you dissect a frog, and the smell and the sight and every bit of this project, just you feel utter disgust. You will remember the attributes of that lesson because of the emotions you expressed in the lesson. Same goes for a project that you really love. If you have intense emotions of love and peace within a lesson, you're going to remember because of that. This will then decide if a learner is going to approach or avoid a task. Whenever you're going into a learning scenario, it determines how much effort you're going to put in it. So a learner that enjoys a topic that's being discussed are going to more likely spend more effort on that said project. So that's what it is with avoid or approach the task. And obviously your thoughts are going to be positive and negative. Your emotions will be positive or negative. Positive emotions would just go to examples of interest, happiness, excitement, and all of these promote learning because, again, you're going to approach a task more in depth if you are interested in it, and therefore that's a positive emotion. And the same exact opposite will go for a negative emotion. When you feel angry or sad or any type of anxiety towards a topic, you're most likely going to shy away from learning about it. And that's why teaching emotional regulation in school is crucial. Emotional regulation is different in every age of learner, but it is just the capacity to control intensity and duration of emotions. The basis of emotional regulation is coping, or attempting to change thoughts or behavior to control strong emotions. Coping could involve problem-focused strategies or emotion-focused strategies. Problem-focused strategies for coping include action-oriented strategies that involve trying to actually change the situation. Remove yourself from a situation to cope with an emotion, or emotion-focused strategies involve actions to change the emotion. Maybe you are happy with where you're at, but you want to focus yourself so deeply on the emotion that you can alter how you perceive the situation. Um, Less constructive versus more constructive. Uh, those coping strategies um, are common in children. Less constructive coping strategies involve doing nothing, aggressing to resolve the problem, or aggression that is just the release of pent-up feelings. You kick a chair, you throw something. Children also sometimes revert to using alcohol or drugs to escape from emotions. They could even eat comfort food, so to speak. Crying to release up pent-up feelings, or crying to elicit help from others, or just have rumination where they just dwell on a thought. Those are all your less constructive emotional regulation coping strategies. More constructive coping strategies involve avoiding a situation that's going to cause a negative emotion, talking with friends or teachers or parents, or even praying. Some children choose to pray and cope with their emotional regulation. Distracting themselves to not think about the problem, exercising. A low arousal of emotions like sadness can help with emotional regulation when you're doing those sorts of exercises. Make themselves relax, seek help from friends, teachers, or parents, or take constructive action to improve the situation. Repraise is trying to think about the situation in a positive way. All of these are more constructive coping strategies, and all of these things fall under emotional regulation in children. Like I mentioned, there are age trends in regulation. In infancy to toddlerhood, which is birth to 2 years, infants cannot voluntarily control their emotions. They have a few basic coping strategies for when they're involved in an overwhelming situation. They may appear to suck on their cheeks or a pacifier. They may appear to sleep with their eyes closed or their brows furrowed, and they may avert their gaze by looking away. When you overstimulate an infant, they tend to look away and help themselves get their emotions back to a normal level because they've been overstimulated, like I said. And then early childhood involves 3 to 5 year olds. This is where they can begin to regulate their emotions. They do need adult help. They generally have negative levels, the negativity levels off, or completely decreases by the age of 2. But preschoolers often have these emotional breakdowns. We call them tantrums. We generally see these disappear between ages 3 and 5, but can still happen. And then middle childhood is your children from the age of 6 to 12. They begin to regulate their own emotions in settings away from their caregiver, their guardian, their parents, and they have 4 general coping strategies. They use social support less, like talking to others. They have more coping strategies starting around 5 that they're able to use with reprisal strategies. They're able to select the best strategy because they have better judgment of their own control over situation. And then remember that emotion focused strategies are better in situations in which a child has no control. And they rely more on emotion focused strategies because they continue to use problem focused strategies as well. And then lastly, adolescence is 13 to 19-year-olds, and adolescents have reported feeling a lot of daily stress, usually concerning relationships with friends or parents and pressure to do well in school. So this is kind of a tough time for children, but there's a common stereotype that this age of students are moody and negative, implying that they have poor emotional regulation. This is not necessarily true. They also reported feeling bored and tired and sleepy. They reported feeling social discomfort, awkwardness, loneliness, and this just kind of all this, they have all these different emotions, perhaps because adolescents tend to be more sensitive to emotions involving social evaluations, such as feeling embarrassment, if somebody's looking at them or something. But they also reported to feel extremely happy most of the time. So adolescents are not necessarily moody, even though they are frequently angry or sad, they just have a higher ratio of positive to negative events. So age trends in regulation vary greatly between the different ages of children, but continue to level off as they grow older. Individual diversity, there is individual diversity in every single attribute of your body because every person is different. Um, every person is going to be different in their emotional response, how intense their emotion is, and the recovery time it takes to fall back out of that stimulated emotion into a normal level of emotional response. Learners can tend to be underregulated or overregulated, debating on how their emotional regulation experiences go. Underregulated learners experience chronic negative emotions or rapidly change from one extreme emotion to another. Overregulated would be the opposite. Overregulated learners, could be the opposite. Emotional regulation in your individual self could be a risk factor for these underregulated learners, or it can be protective for the overregulated learners. And all of this factors into how well someone perceives an event, how well they regulate their own emotions, and how well they can recover back from that. Depression and anxiety is another part of needing to understand. Let me rephrase that. Depression and anxiety are two extremely important emotions that teachers need to be aware of in students. Depression is an internalizing disorder in which children have feelings of sadness severely for at least 2 weeks, but could be chronic. They may be mild, but they could be chronic. This involves a change in appetite, self-criticism, irritability, poor hygiene, frequent crying, and sleep problems. Anxiety in a child is similar, in which the emotions overlap depression, but the child worries about future threats or threats to the sense of themselves. They also have feelings of not being able to sit down, such as hair twirling, lip licking, crying, chewing on objects, and nail biting. 8% of U.S. adolescents have a major depressive episode, and 11% have severe depression. The median age for onset in depression is 11 and 6 for anxiety. This means that less than half of the age of 11 and 6 children are experiencing depression and anxiety already, and that's just extremely young. There's group diversity in emotion regulation as well. Obviously, gender plays a big role in emotional regulation. I feel that I've heard it throughout my life that girls are more skilled with how well they can talk about their feelings and whatnot. And it is true that in infancy, girls are more skilled at regulating than boys. But girls are also more likely to be anxious and therefore are more depressed than boys. Mainly because girls just have more stress in their emotions and cope in ways that are going to result in a more depressive emotion. Social economic status is always a factor in group diversity. The financial status of a learner could explain how they cope with distress. If they have a rougher home life, they're going to probably be more overstimulated in distress situations. And same for ethnicity. Acculturation is a long-term process of adapting to a new culture. Ethnicity just plays a lot into how you adapt to emotions and how you can regulate those emotions.